Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LCK Week 15 overview and analysis video, and it's the final week of the LCK regular season here in 2025. We're going to wrap up everything here today. We're going to know our teams that are eliminated, that will not be qualifying even for the play-ins. We're going to know our play-in matchups, and of course, a much clearer picture of what the best teams in the league are looking like as we head into the back end of the year. I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below. Very curious to know where you guys landed on these teams coming out of the regular season, whether or not this final week ended up changing anything for you. We got some big matchups between some pretty big teams, and so I'm excited to go over it. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the video, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will be typically updating my power rankings. I almost went right into it because of just how much we've done that in the LCK throughout this year, but actually no power rankings update, no standing snapshot. We're going to be looking at the play-in bracket at the end of the video, kind of previewing the next steps for the 4 teams that are there. Of course, if you don't remember, it's the bottom 1 team from the Legend group, and it's the top 3 teams from the Rise group that end up playing for the final 2 playoff spots. So excited to preview that, but of course, most of today will be spent talking about the games themselves. So without further ado, let's get into day number 1, and boy, did we kick off week number 15 with a very good matchup, or at least one that on paper seems to be very good. It was T1 taking on Hanwha Life, and just as it has been throughout basically the entirety of this split, T1 is just better. They're going to pick up the 2-1 series win, and HLE continue to feel exactly the same as they have throughout basically all of this split, which is a team that is directly on the outside of being good. They're definitely better than teams like KT Rolster and certainly Nongshim, but they're not as good as the top 2. They are firmly at number 3 right now in the LCK, which is okay, all things considered. There is a real argument that Gen.G and T1 are just the 2 best teams in the world, and perhaps, by proxy, you could theoretically make the argument that HLE is still a top 5 team in the world. I might even make that argument right now, but the problem is it doesn't really feel like this team is a threat to actually win the world championships like they felt they would be at the beginning of the year, and, I think that is frustrating for them and for a lot of their fans. But for T1, this is obviously another very big victory, and quite frankly, they're just better in terms of their execution. Games 1 and 3, their victories in this series were very clean. Even game 2 was decently back and forth, certainly the closest game of the entire series. It took HLE really stepping up, in the back half of that game, kind of a full team-wide effort from Gwen and from Ezreal and from Talia and from Xin Zhao and then the Alistar, all of it, right? Like, all of them had to play well in order to even dent T1, where T1 kind of rolled over in their wins. So we'll talk about it here. Player of the series is very obviously going to KIA again. No spoilers for the end of the video, but it's pretty obvious who's running away with the summer split MVP. As you guys know, I am separating spring and summer in terms of my awards. I am going to give out an award specifically for the summer split. Year-long MVP will be Chovy. Like, I'm just letting you know that that's what's going to happen. It's what should happen. He's been the best player in the LCK this year, but KIA definitely running away right now with the best player in the summer regular season. He truly just has been spectacular. This bot lane has not only found their form from what they were, in their prime and what they've been in world finals before and all of that stuff. This might be the best they've ever played as a duo. Like, genuinely, I'm not sure if there's been this prolonged of a stretch of time where both of them are playing this well. Guma certainly had a lot of moments like this last year where he was fantastic for the team, but KIA also struggled a bit in the regular season last year. And when KIA was popping off and, playing like one of the best supports in the world in 2023, that's when it felt like they were putting Guma more on weak side and just kind of asking him to play alone in the laning phase while KIA left. It's never really felt like the 2v2 has always been clicking and dominating in the way that it is right now. But KIA on these playmakers, things like obviously the Rakan in game 2, but the Bard in game 3, which was absolutely massive. Those are the bread and butter, right? KIA still is the best support in the world when you give him things that he's comfortable on, and that's exactly what he got in this series. But I don't want to discount everyone else. Faker had an incredible series here. I think the KDA is not even indicative of just how well he played. He's kind of taken more of a backseat role as he typically does in the regular season for this team, but the Galio, the Orianna, both of those games, tremendous. He might have even been the player of the series. I think you could make a really strong argument that Faker was the best player on the Rift here today. Owner ends up with a ridiculous amount of kills because he gets to play things like Nocturne in a comp that has Orianna Bard as set up to really enable him to dive in and be as aggressive as he wants. I already talked a bit about Guma being really strong strong. Doran has improved his laning phase, which was the only weakness for him at the beginning of the year. He has been a tremendous team fighter, the best team fighter in the top lane role in the LCK, arguably in the world. It's just really about the fact that his laning phases have not been perfect. He's quite often down in gold. If he can start leveling up as he has been recently and just being stronger in the 1v1, we already know he's going to be strong in the 5v5. He's just that kind of player. So we feel really good about T1. They are exactly who we thought they were. And for Hanwha Life on the other side, like that's the bigger question here, is just what is it going to take for HLE to actually start ascending back up to the top of the standings? Like, what do they need to do in order to start competing with T1 and with Gen.G for being one of the best teams in the LCK? The real answer is just that everybody needs to start figuring how to not run games down again, because the problem for HLE has just been that the form that these players are in is not good. Zeka feels mental boomed into oblivion right now. He's going to get dead of the series for me. The Akali game in game number 3 was just simply not good enough. He was easily the weak link in that third and final game. I don't know what happened in game 3 of the Gen.G series in the playoffs before MSI. That broke him. Like, genuinely, I don't use that term lightly. I really try not to throw that out. In fact, I've been a big Zeka defender over the course of this split. I do still think he's been better than people are talking about him. He's not been the biggest nightmare on this team or anything like that. Like, he's definitely still been the 3rd best or 4th best mid laner in the LCK. Like, that's not really debatable. You can even see that on the Talia game in game 2. But something about that game 3 versus Gen.G where they don't end up qualifying, where they start getting reverse swept, like that point onwards, his clutch factor is gone. Like his ability to step up in big moments. That was the thing Zeka was most known for. 2022 Worlds, you know, the beginning of this year in the winter split where he really went on that dynamic run in the playoffs. It really just felt like he was always going to be this big clutch guy. And right now he's the opposite of that. He is powering down as you get to game 3. And that's really frustrating. He played one of his signature champions in Akali here and got completely ran down. It's just not good enough. Zeka needs to start stepping up for this team. But it's everybody else too. Peanut, I think, has had a pretty terrible second half of the year. It hasn't really ever felt like he's clicked in the way that maybe he's wanted to. I don't think Zeus has been able to follow up on his spring split nearly as strongly as before. I think there still are good games, but it's not necessarily the overwhelming dominance that we saw from him even just a couple of months ago. Viper and Delight have been the strength of this team, but Delight's not been nearly as good as he was at the beginning of the year when he was playing like the best support in the world. Viper's the only player trying to carry this team, but he wasn't good in this series. He was making a ton of positional mistakes, and so for HLE, it just feels like everybody on this team is underperforming, and, you know, if you want to look at it from the bright side, that theoretically means that if they turn it around, there still is a ton of upside for this team to get better, but it's really hard to kind of imagine that right now because it feels like something is internally broken. But for T1, second best team in the LCK, they'll have the chance to prove that they are the best at the end of this week. We'll see how that ends up going, but at least for now, T1 definitely still a threat to be the best team in the world. Then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and this was a pretty easy one to guess just based off the matchup itself. It was the DN Freecs taking on BNK FearX, and FearX is going to pick up the 2-0 victory. You know, DNF have definitely been better. I would certainly say more competitive over the past couple of weeks, and, you know, they've actually shown some life within them, pun entirely intended, but BNK FearX actually looks very scary. You know, I've been talking about it on the channel. I think there's a non-zero chance this is the 5th best team in the LCK right now, just because I think DK and Nongshim are so inconsistent that on any given day, do I think there is a world where FearX could just be better than them in a best of 5? Absolutely. They might get the chance to prove that by qualifying for the playoffs. There's also the chance that they are just the 7th team in the LCK and that Nongshim's just been getting slaughtered by good teams and DK is, you know, DK and they'll figure it out eventually. Like, that's also the more realistic possibility, but I want to open the door for the fact that BFX has actually been pretty good over the second half of this year, and I think they continued that in this series. Raptor, for me, is going to get player of the series. You know, Diablo ends up eating up these player of the series like, you know, a healthy breakfast throughout most of this split. So it's nice to see Raptor be able to get some shine for a split that I think's been very good from him, all things considered. I don't think he's a star or anything like that. I think he's always going to have a limit as a player in terms of just what he is because of the way that he plays the game. He's somebody that's much more aggressive. He's going to take a lot of risks, and, you know, it's not always going to work out, right? Like, he's like a slightly more volatile version of someone like Kroko. I think that that's like the most apt comparison that I can possibly give for Raptor, but there are going to be days where he just pops off and like really, really performs for this team, and his setup this series was phenomenal. Like, genuinely, he was just incredible for BFX. The Xin Zhao, the Jarvan, I think both of those games were just really, really strong. Pioshik has really struggled to find a foothold, but he has definitely been better, especially the last 2 weeks, and I think Raptor really really kind of took advantage of him in this jungle matchup. It was quite clear who the better jungler was. Also, it was quite clear who the better AD carry was in this series. Diablo continues to really push a lot of BFX forward. I think most of that happened because of the setup from the Jarvan rather than because the Sivir was incredible, but still, like, go look at Berserker on the other side of this matchup. He gets a hyper carry in Zeri and ends up frontlining basically the entire game and just dying in fights over and over again. Diablo, all he had to do was not do that, and that's exactly what he did. I think the only concern with Diablo is that, oh, does he need to be a main character? Does he need to be on a team where everybody plays for him? Because that's all we've ever seen from him at the LCK level. This was a series and a game 2 in particular that really showcased, okay, maybe they can just play for other pieces, and I know that's weird to say about a Sivir that kind of became the hyper carry, but he didn't have to generate that lead himself. He could allow BFX to really run the game, and he could just kind of stay in his lane, do his thing, and, you know, do the damage that was needed to win the game. He didn't have to be the one stepping up and creating everything for BFX like he had been throughout the year. I still think Kellen's awesome. This guy's one of the better Enchanter players in the LCK. He has been for quite a while, so no surprise to see something like Lulu go very successfully in Game 1, but the Rakan in Game 2, you know, right alongside the Jarvan as primary setup. Vikla was honestly solid, I would say, in this series. Still some major problems for him in terms of stepping too far forward. He's not a good player, but I will continue to die on the hill that, like, there are worse players than Vikla. I just think his bad games stand out to a lot of people. I think he's been better in summer than a lot of people remember outside of the bad games. Again, I think I would say probably 40% of the games Vikla has played this split, like if you just ignore everything before this split, have been fine. Like they've been, you know, bottom of the LCK, but not like catastrophically terrible, you know, better than Bulldog, I would say, on the other side, even if the other 60% have not been very good. Clear, you know, he sometimes plays well and he sometimes doesn't, just super inconsistent, not very stable. You don't really know what you're going to get out of him, but BFX have pieces to build off of here. Again, Raptor, Diablo, Kellen, I think they're 3 very good players that could very well qualify for the playoffs. And for DNF on the other side, pretty obvious who dud of the series is for me. It's Berserker in the bot lane. I didn't really have to think about this at all. I think Berserker actually was just a detriment to his team in this series, and I get it. He had a lot of the gold, he had a lot of the resources, and maybe they're only in that game 2 because of Berserker, but he actively took them out of it because, oh boy, his positioning was bad. He has gotten worse throughout the year. It's kind of the opposite of what I just talked about with someone like Vikla on the other side. Berserker seems to have mentally checked out. This guy was actively the only player doing anything for them at the beginning of the year. Now I just think he's one of the weaker AD carries in the LCK. Hopefully a better environment can get him into a better spot, because I still think he can be a productive ADC at the LCK level. It's just not going to happen with this team in particular. You can talk about the support swap here. Quantum ended up coming in for Game 1 playing the Nico. Life came in for Game 2. Whatever. Like, it doesn't really matter. Neither of these guys are particularly effective right now. This team needs a lot more than a good support in order to figure things out. Bulldog ended up getting outclassed by Vikla. That is a very, very bad place to be. Pioshik got out jungled by Raptor, as I already talked about, but this felt a lot more normal. This wasn't one of Pioshik's, like, run down the game kinds of series. Dudu also was just worse than Clear on the top side. He's also been very inconsistent. Another player that, you know, as much as I'd love to hold on to hope to what I talked about in 2023, I just don't know how much of that is still there with him. I think he's really fallen off as a player. DNF, it's just hard to really believe in them. I do think they're better. Like, even the fact that they were competitive in these 2 games is not something that maybe would have happened a couple of months ago, but BFX is, like, genuinely a good Rise Group team. They're not one of the bottom 3 that I think are super inconsistent, and this is a team that is fighting to find the momentum to make playoffs right now. So excited to see where BFX go. This is a nice win for them. Then moving on now to day number 2, and I was really excited about our kickoff series here on day 2 because I wanted to see the sweep happen. Alas, we're not going to get it. It's Dplus KIA taking on OK BRION, and DK is going to pick up their first win against Bro all split long, at least in terms of a series victory. I really thought they were going to go 0-3 against Bro because that's just how things go for DK. Bromaker ends up showing up. Bro randomly plays the best games they play all year long against Dplus KIA. Like, the Damwon, Bro rivalry has always been really fun to watch, but DK finally getting the better end of it this split with a really dominant victory. These 2 games were not remotely close. There's not even really a ton to go over. More so just narrative beats, I think, to hit on for both of these teams as we get closer to games that will actually matter for them moving forward. But starting with DK, this is a pretty nice win because you need to start building some confidence, I think, going into the play-in stage. The fact that you're in Rise Group just inherently means that you have a slightly more difficult road ahead because you don't necessarily either get to take advantage of the team that's been getting slammed in the Legend Group in Nongshim in that first round, nor do you get to take on the worst team in the play-in stage because you'll never be the #1 seed no matter how you end up playing. And so you need to make sure that you generate as much momentum as possible heading into the play-ins, at least for that round #1 matchup. I think this was was a good way to do so. Basically, everybody ended up stomping their opponent. I think the most egregious was certainly the jungle matchup where Lucid was much better than Krako, and Lucid is going to get player of the series, but I think you can point to multiple different areas on the Rift. I think Beryl played phenomenal. I really considered Beryl for player of the series. I think Showmaker with his Ahri game in game 2 certainly made an argument, but Lucid I think was the most dominant across both of these games combined, and I think he was the one who ended up taking advantage of the game situation the most, so I gave it to him. Again, it's really weird to talk about Lucid because I think the conversation has kind of shifted so much throughout the year. There were moments last year where it's like, oh, he's terrible in spring, and then he figured it out in summer. Something clicked in the spring playoffs when he was really good against Canyon and Gen.G, and, you know, things looked like they were going to get better for him, and they did in the summer split where he was significantly improved. It felt like he was on the up. And then this year at the beginning in winter, when this team was the #1 seed going into the playoffs, it felt like Lucid was a top 10 player in the world, somebody who could actively be making the case for being the best jungler in the world. It's all fallen apart throughout the rest of the year. He's kind of just been a guy throughout the rest of the year. He's not necessarily been the problem for this team, but he's not winning games for them. He's not even the one where you look at like, oh, when they are winning games, it's Lucid. No, that's Showmaker. Like, it's when they are winning games, it's Showmaker who steps up. But if he is going to eventually be able to get back to that more comfortable state where he can genuinely start dominating games again, like, really, there was no reason for this to be his, you know, narrative going into the end of the year. It would have been pretty realistic for DK to genuinely just be a legend group team, and we talk about Lucid like an upper tier jungler in the world. He needs to get back there. Obviously, this is a good sign that it's possible. It's just kind of frustrating that it's this situation at all. But I think the other main player you have to talk about here is Beryl. As I mentioned before, he would have been my other choice for player of the series, and honestly, I still think it's totally fine if you want to give it to him. I've not been shy in this channel's history about being a bit anti-Beryl in comparison to maybe what other people's opinions are. I think this guy actively runs down multiple regular season series just because he doesn't care. You know, his great games are great. Like, I'm not going to deny that the Beryl that shows up at Worlds is always, for the most part, excellent, and I get why DK fans wanted him back, but I also will continue to laugh in the face of DK fans that thought Beryl was going to fix every single problem only for their macro to be the worst in the entire LCK, because it is. Like, even the worst, even DNF, I think plays more controlled than DK. DK is just so much better from a mechanics perspective that, you know, it's not comparable, but it is what it is with Beryl. At least he showed up here today. The Bard, the Nautilus, it looked very good. It definitely outclassed Polu in terms of how that support matchup went. So you want to see Beryl continue to play well, but I'm never going to believe that it's going to be a long extended period of time until he actively proves that he can do that. Showmaker was excellent here, I think specifically on the Ahri. He's really been the one player that has actively been winning games for them against a lot of the bottom tier teams, not against Bro. This is the first time he's even played remotely okay against Bro, but outside of those series against teams like FearX and, you know, DRX, things like that, that's where Showmaker's really been able to step up. Shiwu was much better than Morgan. Morgan's had a very quietly miserable second half of the year. Like, he has been one of the worst top laners in the LCK, if not the worst top laner in the LCK in the second half of the year. I don't think it's going to get talked about enough because Morgan's got such a good reputation and he's a fan favorite, but he's been bad in the second half of the year, like very, very bad. Aiming goes deathless. That's always a good sign. DK just looks solid. Like, I think that there's a lot to like for DK in this series. It's really just about which version of them shows up. We've seen them beat up on the bottom tier teams. We've seen them lose to Bro multiple times throughout this split already, and so you never really know who it's going to be when you know, get DK on the stage any given day. But for Bro, this team is really collapsing down the stretch. This team's like quietly very bad. There's not really a lot going for them. Krako was, you know, kind of elevating them, I think, at the beginning of the split where he was playing well. Now that he is not playing well, I think a lot of the other big mistakes and problems that this team has, they're just not hideable anymore. Closer, I think, has really regressed. I don't think he's playing nearly the same way he did in the spring split. People really like Hype, and I think that there is potentially something there, but they have to give him so many resources in order for him to be useful right now, and, you know, it's just not really conducive to actually winning when everyone has to sacrifice so much for your AD carry to be in a remotely playable spot. Like I already said before, Morgan has been terrible. I think Polu is a below average support, really, no matter how you slice it. It's just not going well. I already said it a bit. I guess I can go more into depth. Krako is done of the series. There's not even a ton to talk about here. It's just Pantheon and Wukong games where he's not able to get any sort of advantage early, ends up falling behind a ton in tempo. Lucid plays really well, and he just gets tempoed out. You know, Krako was actively the one winning games for them against DK earlier on in the season. If he's just going to get absolutely blasted in matchups like this, like, again, it's him and Closer. They're the two good players on this team. Half of Hype. Every so often you get a good game from Hype, and I would say Morgan, but it's just not been there over the second half. Bro is really kind of feeling washed a bit right now, so hopefully they can figure it out. They have a big series at the end of the week here that's going to determine whether or not they get into the play-in stage. They need to make sure they're as good as possible for that. But for DK, they basically locked themselves in as the #1 team in Rise Group before any games were even played. There was basically nothing to play for, I should say, throughout this split. DK just kind of was doing it to generate as much confidence as possible, and if this is going to be one of their last showings in the regular season, confidence is certainly something they got from this series. But then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and it's a very obvious top-of-the-table clash. It's Gen.G taking on KT Rolster, and Gen.G steamrolled over them. Is anyone particularly shocked by this outcome? I'm going to be honest, like, I continue to see KT fans be like, oh, we're so bad. Why aren't we able to compete with Gen.G? At some point, these people have to wake up. Like, I get that, like, part of being a KT fan is just general masochism. Like, you just like to be, you know, disappointed. You like to feel pain. You like to not be happy. Like, there's no way you can cheer for KT and their history and the things that they've done to their fan base without having some sort of, you know, part of that, you know, in your brain. But, like, seriously, it's actually getting really annoying for me. And at some point, I'm going to start, like, really going off. I'm going to start saying usernames because I'm, like, one step away from doing that. But like, KT fans, I respect you a ton for your loyalty to the team. If you think you should be competing with Gen.G, wake up. Like, I'm sorry, like, all due respect, so there's just nothing else to say there. For Gen.G, they're the best team in the world. They dominated everywhere on the map, to, you know, even in the places where the KDA wasn't the most immense, or you look at the box score and it maybe doesn't look all that broken, like, Gen.G just dominated across the rift, and I think that's really encapsulated by Keen in this series, who is the easy choice for player of the series. He was incredible throughout both of these games. Of course, the Scion was completely unbreakable in game 2. That's really what ends up kind of propelling him into player of the series, but it's not like he was bad at all on the Aurora in game 1. Was way better than Perfect on the other side. Again, I will talk about Perfect because I'm the Perfect defender. I am the Peter defender. You know, I need everyone on Reddit to hate me, I guess, because I'm just going to triple and quadruple down on these takes, but we'll get into it. But for Keen, like, he's just a really good player. Like, what do you even want me to say? This guy played Scion and took over. Like, yeah, that's Keen. That's what he's done all year long. It's what he did last year. It's what he's done his whole career on Africa, on every team he's been on. Like, it is what it is. Like, Keen is a really good player, and he's really stable, especially on these tanks on the top side, where he's arguably the best of all time. I think you can look in a couple of other directions as well for players that ended up really pushing the game forward. Big shock there. Duro was way better than Peter in this particular series. The Pyke in game number 1, really aggro. Really like when Gen.G bring out a lot of these more aggressive picks, because I think it allows them to really, you know, end rallies quicker. There were times in the spring split where it felt like they were opening up the door for teams to be able to get back into games, because they were picking these, like, slower paced, like, more methodical comps, which do play into their play style. But you pick things like, you know, Pyke Jhin in the bot lane, even with something like an Aurora on the top side in game number 1. If you get a lead, there's basically no way for KT to get back into this game. So credit to Duro, he's been spectacular. Ruler he's playing the best he has been all year. I don't think that's really all that arguable. Chovy's gonna win MVP. Canyon's probably the best jungler in the world. Like, it's Gen.G. Come on, man. Like, there's no real analysis I can give. And for KT on the other side, yeah, this team has problems. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like Perfect and Peter are, you know, the players that are going to bring them to the promised land. I think that there are issues with the way that they play the game. The thing I continue to get frustrated by is all of the copium that ends up flowing through KT's system of, like, oh, if we had a different top and support, maybe we'd be able to compete with Gen.G. Oh no, like, yeah, Cuz is competing with Canyon, sure, man. Like, you can live in that world. Dekdom is competing with Ruler, sure, man. You can live in that world if you really want to. I'm not going to be in that world. I like this KT team for what they are. What they are is the 4th best team in the LCK, a team that will be going to Worlds, will be making an effort to get into the quarterfinals, and will likely not be going further than that. That's KT Rolster. That is what this team is meant to be. And if you want to say that BDD in particular deserves better than that, yeah, go ahead and say that. I think that there is an understandable, like, argument about, oh, BDD, if he was on, you know, Hanwha Life, would that team be competing for top 3 right now with the way that Zeka's playing? I think that there is a conversation surrounding, you know, something like that BDD should be trying to win Worlds, but you can't say KT should be trying to win Worlds because they have BDD. You should be saying that BDD should be trying to win Worlds in spite of KT, because no one else on this roster is top 3 in the LCK worthy. Like, absolutely no one. It's just kind of the truth. Like, you have one player that should be in that conversation. It's not like, oh, if we traded Perfect and Peter to Nongshim for Kingen and Lehens, which is something that was proposed in the post-match thread of this series, oh, all of a sudden we'd be a top 3 team. That's delusional. Like, truly, I mean that in, like, the most clear way possible. If this team was Kingen, Cuz, BDD, Dekdom, Lehens, they are nowhere close to even being Hanwha Life. Like, they are in the exact same spot. It just, you know, I don't know, man. I start to get frustrated. Peter's dud of the series, by the way. The Bard game was absolutely miserable. The Alistar didn't do a ton in Game 3 either. Perfect ended up getting really outplayed on the top side. The Cassante never really had laning, you know, options into the Scion, but this is just how it goes. If you don't have one of the top tier players in these roles, which by the way, Kingen, not that guy, is certainly not across this split, then it's not going to happen. If you're not Zeus, if you're not Doran, like, I just don't think you're going to be in a spot where you can compete at that level. You know, I think you obviously mentioned Keen there as well, but like, you can't compete with Gen.G outside of that. So KT, it's the same story as before. They're going to be a Worlds team. They're going to be the weakest Worlds team out of the LCK. They might make the quarterfinals, and they'll do fine there. And then for Gen.G, they're the best team in the world until proven otherwise. The only real question is what happens later on in the week. We set it for T1, we set it up for Gen.G. That's the matchup. It's really just about when those two teams go head to head. Those are the interesting series that we can take things from. Outside of that, it's Gen.G, man. There's no analysis. But then moving on to day number 3, our middle day of the week, as you guys know, and we get the final performance from our first team to close off their regular season. It's BNK FearX taking on DRX, and BFX is going to end their 2025 regular season with a 2-1 series win, and they're going to do so in pretty great fashion. I think that there are some concerns with game number 1. It's like, should you really be dropping games to DRX really at any capacity? That team has arguably looked like the worst team in the league over the past, 2 or 3 weeks, with DNF actually looking relatively competent, at least in their own losses. But, at the end of the day, game 2, game 3 ended up happening, and to get such a complete performance, I would say, from all 5 members of the team, that's what BFX needs to do in order to be competitive. It's not just, oh, we hope Diablo and Raptor can carry us. If this is genuinely a team that wants to be in the playoffs and wants to be top 6, you need everyone to, at the very least, be competent. And we saw that in this series, where basically everybody was really good, and that's really highlighted by the fact that player of the series is going to Vikla in the mid lane. This is huge for them. Not his first player of the series of the split, by the way. This is his second player of the series. I want to make it clear, I'm not trying to say Vikla's had a good year. I think that would be preposterous. I think when you watch him in winter, especially when you watch him in spring, you're looking at the worst player in the LCK, certainly somebody that has not proven that they deserve to have a roster spot. And I was really upset with this team for starting him again going into summer, because I did not think that there was anything left to get out of Vikla going into the summer split when they had other options, Daystar in particular here in the mid lane. But you know what? He's kind of proven me wrong. I wouldn't say he's entirely proven me wrong. There's been plenty of bad games, but again, like 40% of the games he's played this split, totally fine. And there have been maybe 5% where it's like, oh, actually, that was pretty good. And this was one of the 5% where you're watching the Yone in game 3, you're watching the Akali in game 2, and you're seeing these aggressive plays be made. You're seeing him genuinely generate a lead on his own in the mid lane. It's good stuff. It's old Vikla. It's KT Vikla in terms of the way he's playing. Hopefully there's something in there still to be able to tap through. He just needs to be fine enough, because the rest of this team is solid. Raptor's a genuinely very good player right now in terms of the consistency that he is playing with. Again, he is very wild, he's very aggressive, but I think he's reined in at least some of the traits that ended up making him so crazy back in the day for, Sandbox and for FearX. I think he's definitely a bit more consistent now, and honestly, I'm just really liking the performances that he's putting out. I think he's in great form. Diablo and Kellen need no introduction. You could argue that Diablo was player of the series. He, has that game 3 Callista. By the way, everyone's still talking as if, oh, I can't believe it, Diablo won a game on Callista. That must make him the best AD carry in the world. Har, har, har. As if Callista's not been picking up wins all split long everywhere in the world. Like, I get people don't watch any games, but if you don't watch any games, why are you commenting on these games on social media? It just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Jokes aside, Diablo was, great. He was awesome here. Ended up playing the Callista really well. I think Callista Yone is very scary, even with Silas jungle, to play into. So Kellen looking great, clear, solid enough on the top side, even if Rich continues to be a strength for DRX. BFX is a genuinely good team, and they ended the regular season about as strongly as they could. And for DRX on the other side, Sponge for me is going to get dud of the series. Some ups and downs, I would say, for Sponge across this year. There have been moments where I think he's looked okay. I think it's looked worse in summer. I think the entirety of this team has generally looked worse in the summer split. You can attribute part of that to Yehu in the mid lane, although I don't think he was the problem in this particular series, but essentially the lack of UCal in the mid lane, I think, is definitely starting to hurt DRX. I think Ondel has not really made the developments that you're looking for. Teddy is just so passive down in the bot lane. Even if he has been much better in that regard in 2025, I will continue to say that. I think Teddy has played a lot better this year than he has in the past couple of years. They just don't really have the talent to continue to push forward. And if Sponge is going to have all this responsibility on him, he's not really that kind of player, man. You can't be putting him on Lee Sin with an Azir and a Jhin in game game number 3 and you'd be like, oh, hey, Sponge, like win us the early game or lose us the game. Like that's just too much for a player like Sponge. I think that that's improper drafting for DRX. He has his strengths. He certainly has his weaknesses, but I think those weaknesses are being exploited much more. Still some positives on this team. Like I said, I think Teddy's been better across this year than he has been recently. You know, maybe not in terms of actual results, because I think, you know, basically you can look at this year and last year and 2 years ago and see like basically identical results, but I think the process has been better. He's been trying a lot more in the 2v2 and generating more resources for himself, which I think is good. Rich has genuinely been good on the top side. Do I think he's been great? Maybe not, but I think he's been like an average top laner in the LCK. I think that there are teams that would love to have a player like Rich on the top side, even if he does have his own set of weaknesses. He's a playoff caliber top laner. Top 6, I think, is totally fair for the kind of form that he's in right now, especially when players like Morgan end up getting a bit more, you know, shine. I think Rich has been infinitely better than a player like Morgan and even clear throughout this year. Like there are pluses to DRX, but they're going to need to show it. Their series at the end of the week against Bro that we will talk about. The winner of that makes play-ins. The loser of that is done for the year. You need to be able to step up and win that. But for BFX, their regular season is done. As I said, they ended a pretty good spot. Their momentum is really high right now, and hopefully they're going to use that to capitalize and actually get themselves into playoffs like I think they look like they can right now. Then moving on to our second series of day number 3, and this is a series that I think just has a lot of the narrative points we've already talked about. It's Hanwha Life taking on Nongshim RedForce, and Hanwha Life is going to pick up the dominant 2-0 victory. Not really a ton to talk about here. Nongshim, you know, very much on pace. They're one series away from going winless in the Legend group. This team has been slaughtered over and over again. You know, Calyx, I think, has looked good. Probably the only player to come out of this Legend group for Nongshim that even looks like a capable LCK player against the top 4 all that regularly. You know, Jiwoo and Lehens have been terrible. Gideon has looked so much worse than he has at any other point this year. Kengan has been easily one of the weaker top laners from a raw production standpoint in almost every metric or eye test, you know, whatever. At least they have Calyx, at least they have someone they can try and build things off of, but Hanwha Life are so much better, even in their most weakened state. And this is the thing, right? You talk about these teams like Hanwha Life and KT Rolster as if they're terrible because they can't go up against Gen.G and T1 all that regularly. These are still arguably top 5 teams in the world. Maybe not KT Rolster, but HLE very much has like a strong argument for being a top 5 team in the world. And I think people forget that because half their games are against teams that are, you know, a top 2 in the world. And it just kind of is what it is for them. But we'll go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series is very obviously going to Peanut. This guy still is the best facilitator in the world. Like, I think Tarzan is up there as well, but Tarzan's much more inconsistent than Peanut is on these kinds of champions. You get Peanut on Sejuani, you get him on Maokai, you get him on Poppy, you get him on these things, he's gonna be able to dominate games. Like, he's just so good at this role. And quite frankly, I think HLE just need to simplify things. I think they need to, you know, say, screw the meta. Who cares about Xinja? Who cares about Pantheon? Who cares about Vi? Like, I don't want to play any of that stuff. Just pick me Sejuani. Let's play the style that we know works for us. That's the thing that I think HLE is gonna really kind of propel themselves on. I get that they were winning on other things earlier this year, but right now I think the goal should be to simplify the process as much as possible for a team that, quite frankly, feels overmatched and feels like they're trying to overcomplicate everything. Zeka looked a much better in this series, and I think a lot of it was the Talia in game 2. Remember, he was really good on Talia against T1 earlier on this week already. You know, he can play these kinds of champions that are just there to shove and roam. You don't need to give him a billion things to worry about in all these games. I get that Akali and Silas and Yone and these kinds of champs are kind of signature for Zeka. It just feels like the team functions a lot better when Peanut and Zeka have the same role, when they can basically do the same thing on the map and push everything forward and allow Viper and Zeus to be able to do enough damage to carry games, because Viper was massive in this one as a hyper carry, the Corki, the Sivir, things that can do well in lane, that can shove things out while also being scaling threats. That's very, very helpful for HLE. Delight, I think, was much better in this series, and even if Zeus didn't have to do all that much on the top side, he certainly was winning in lane against Kengan, who has been a nightmare over the course of the past few series. So HLE feel good, like they feel like a good team. And again, I think if this was a regular round robin where, you know, the HLE actually had a bunch of games against the Rise group teams, I don't think there would be nearly the pessimism that there is surrounding HLE. Basically, all of the negativity is just because they haven't gotten the chance to show that they are so much better than every team that isn't T1 and Gen.G, because 50% of their games are against those two teams. So HLE is fine. Don't worry about them. They're a top 3 team, arguably top 5 in the world. I would certainly make that argument. And for Nongshim on the other side, this team is bad. Like, they're actually just, they've lost all the spark. And I get that if you want to make the argument that, well, HLE hasn't really had a chance to showcase what they're doing because they only play against the best teams in the world, then like, what kind of argument am I making for Nongshim? And you can say that. I've kept them at number 6. I haven't moved my power rankings at all for them over the course of this split. They've been the exact same team that I projected going in to the split. They were not supposed to win any games against a team in the Legend group, but I think that there's more cause for concern because of the ways that they're losing. Lehens and Kingen, who have been such big pieces and pillars for the success of this team at the start of this year, have been nightmarishly bad over the course of this split. Lehens in particular, maybe the least valuable player in the league right now. And again, I get it. It's kind of a, is that fair to say? Because Nongshim's losing every game. Of course, there's going to be a player on Nongshim that loses a lot, but Lehens has looked incompetent in these series. Like, he's done of the series here. I think he's been a nightmare for this team in the support position. He continues to pick things like Shen and Elise, even if the Shen didn't appear in this series, with just the hopes that they're maybe going to surprise HLE. If you want to try these off-meta things that aren't quite as strong as they were before, you need to pick something that teams don't know you're going to pick over and over again. He's got to have like 100% pick rate on Elise in series throughout this year. Like, something ridiculous. Like, if I'm HLE, I'm literally just, okay, well, if we prep for Shen and prep for Elise, they cannot beat us. Like, if we know how to beat those two champions, there's nothing else. Nongshim is too one-dimensional, and Lehens somehow is too one-dimensional in the way that he plays the game right now. His Elise has looked awful this split. It looked very good at the beginning of the year. He was the only player playing it at even a remotely decent level. Not happening anymore. Lehens has been a nightmare. Kingen continues to get bodied on the top side of the map. This guy is looking cooked. Like, I don't know if it's mental. I don't know if it's just the fact that he overperformed at the beginning of the year. Kingen looks terrible right now. He looks like the worst top laner in the Legend group by 4,000 yards. Like, he's so much worse than perfect, and I just don't think KT fans necessarily understand that. Jiwoo has been bad. Gideon, I think, has maybe not been terrible. Again, it's more understandable that he's getting out-tempoed. He hasn't necessarily lost a ton of games for Nongshim, but he's not been good for them. Calyx is the only player that's showing anything in the mid lane right now and gets a solo bolo in this series, which is really good for his reputation. I think there's something to build off of here, but really it feels like a bright spot amidst a sea of darkness for Nongshim, who just can't really seem to get anything going. And for HLE, this is a nice way to end the regular season. They are still likely, at the very least, to get that number 2 seed. Gen.G and T1, as we've been hyping up, play later on in the week. If T1 can win that, they get the number 2 seed going into playoffs. If they can't, no matter the series score, then HLE will be the number 2 seed because of their time in this spring split. So HLE very much cheering for a Gen.G victory. This could still be a team that ends up making a playoff run. You know, we've seen this team kind of pick it up when it matters the most before. Something does feel a bit different about this team now than maybe it did then, but certainly still a lot to like about Hanwha Life. But that's going to bring us to day number 4, and day number 4 was a pretty big one because this was the one everyone wanted to see on the final week. It was T1 taking on Gen.G, the biggest matchup you can get here in the LCK, and Gen.G is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. They are going to once again reaffirm that, at least for now, they are the best team in the world. They are the best team in the LCK, and, you know, we'll see how playoffs go. You can never really count your eggs before they hatch, especially here in the LCK where anything can happen, but Gen.G's win at MSI over T1, beating them twice at that tournament, and then obviously being able to overcome them after stumbling at the very least a little bit at the start of this split against T1, losing their first best of 5 in quite a long time. You know, Gen.G having this incredible end to the regular season, I think it's the only way to really classify it. I think it just goes to reassert what we already knew, which is that this is the team to beat in the world. For T1, they put up an okay fight. You know, maybe everyone outside of the bot lane ended up playing all right. Doran and Owner weren't great. Faker was pretty good in terms of his plays. He wasn't necessarily the problem. I think he had a good week, all things considered. Not that Chovy wasn't better on the other side of the matchup, but certainly something to point out. There are some things to take away from T1, but talking about the wins for Gen.G in games 2 and 3, player of the series is obviously Ruler. I don't think anyone really had to think about this after watching these games. You can talk about how Duro has kind of been snubbed for player of the series multiple times throughout this split, and I would agree with you in some respects. I do just think Ruler has been incredible, though. I have been one to give Ruler a lot of credit for Gen.G throughout a lot of this year. He got a lot of player of the series for me in the spring split as well, when everybody was saying that he was washed. He was somebody that I considered a first-team all-pro caliber AD carry coming out of the LCK. I didn't really understand the narrative that he wasn't playing up to his standard. I think he's basically playing exactly the same as he did in the previous split. It's just that Chovy has been playing Galio and Annie more. That's really like the only thing that I think has been making any sort of difference for these player of the match, player of the series types of votes. But again, that's not to take away from Ruler, who mega gapped Gumayusi and KIA in this series. If there was ever a conversation about what the best bot lane in the LCK was right now, I think that got resolved in this series, because it truly was not close. The 2v2 was so one-sided, it's actually disgusting. Again, we will get to Guma and KT. They were miserably bad today, but Ruler and Duro were excellent. The Zeri, the Jhin, the two different kinds of playstyles that Ruler has really been going for throughout a lot of this year, either taking, resources really heavily, playing things like Pantheon Galio with this big macro threat alongside a hyper carry, or alternatively having a ton of setup coming out of the middle of the map with things like Wukong and Annie, and then utilizing Jhin to be able to capitalize on that setup, kind of combo off of that with more CC and more layering coming out. Ruler obviously is exceptional in both roles, but it really was his laning in this series that ended up being the big difference maker. Duro, I think, could theoretically be in that conversation as well. I'm going to be honest, the support gap in this series was massive. KT had just had a bad day. He had a couple of really bad moments. The flashes weren't there. The laning wasn't there. Like, KT did not play well here today, but if you do want to make the argument, hey, well, Duro just outplayed KT in a pretty pivotal best of 3 at the end of the regular season, that is something you can definitely say now, because that was absolutely the case. This bot lane was on fire here today for Gen.G, and they were definitely the main characters. Chovy continues to be absolutely unreal in terms of how good he is. We'll talk about Faker, who was solid enough on the other side. I think that there's a lot to like about the way Faker played this series, but Chovy was still way better than him in terms of how things went down. The Galio and the Annie were massive in terms of opening up the map for Gen.G, and I want to reiterate a point that I actually said last week when it came to Chovy. It's basically GG if you give him a macro champion. Like, if you give him Talia or Galio or Ryze or something of that nature, like, you're gonna lose the game. He's just the best in the world at being able to utilize those champs to open up the map, because he's going to do so while still maintaining a gold lead, which everyone else just can't do, like, nearly as efficiently as he can. So kind of breaks the game in that regard. The Galio definitely showed that off, in particular in game 2. Canyon was much better than Owner. Massive jungle Canyon here. I would say less so than, the bot lane gap, but certainly noticeable in the fact that Canyon was consistently able to generate resources, whereas Owner wasn't really finding anything with the plays that he was looking for. Keen was better than Doran in lane on the top side. Not that that should be a surprise. Overall, Gen.G, very strong. They were better than T1, kind of, again, reasserting themselves as the best team in the world. For T1, I've already talked about it a bit, but Faker's really the only player on this team you can be like, well, he tried. And I think that it is admirable that he at least wasn't, running into danger and giving over his life randomly after his team had really lost all sense of direction in the final 2 games. But, he wasn't strong enough to really be able to carry them, because everybody else just ended up in terrible spots. And that falls almost squarely on the bot lane, who just got trounced here today. Like, I've been hyping up Guma and KT. I quite frankly think over the course of this split, there is an argument that they have been the best bot lane in the LCK from a domination perspective, because they've been so good in the 2v2. But honestly, like, this series just makes me rethink that entire conversation, because, if they had just lost, if they had been weaker than Ruler and Duro and just not done well, I would have been like, okay, well, it's one series, you can kind of, make whatever out of it. They got blown back in this. Like, this was terrible, terrible stuff from both of them, and it really is concerning. KT is going to get done of the series, his first of the entire split. This was a nightmare performance, easily the worst he's looked. You just gotta hope it was an off day for him and not something that you can expect from him in bigger matchups. Gumayushi never felt like he was even in the series at all. It felt like the Yunara, the Sivir, especially in the back half here, were just waiting to be able to play the game and just dying in every single fight. The damage difference between Guma and Ruler in this series is concerning, to say the least. I already talked about it a bit, but Owner and Doran also really struggling on the top side of the map. Really just not a lot to like from T1. Not really a lot to praise in this series. They got blasted, and they're going into playoffs now with a little bit less momentum, and they're going in as the 3rd seed, which means they do have to play in the first round. They don't get that bye into the second round that the top 2 seeds get. And for Gen.G, they're very happy to get that. But remember, all of this, say what you will about, like, oh, maybe Gen.G's not going to be able to win finals. They've struggled to do that in summer. It doesn't matter. This team's going to Worlds. Like, they've already locked a World spot. If they don't win a single game the rest of the split in the LCK, it does not matter. They are already going to Worlds because they won MSI. All of this is a formality at the end of the day. Right now, they are just doing this to prove that they are the best team in the world, and I quite frankly can't see a way that you can look at this series any other way now. Then moving on to our second series of day 4, and this might be the last time we ever see this group of 5 players playing together. It's the D and Freecs taking on Dplus KIA. And DK is going to pick up a win to kind of bolster their play-in status going into the aforementioned play-ins, where DNF is now done for the year. Not that we didn't already know going into this week and going into many weeks before this that DNF was going to be the last place team from a standing standpoint in the LCK. Rather, this is it. Like, no more games, they're done. There's not even anything symbolic to play for at this point. This organization is done for 2025, and we'll see the direction that they end up heading in for 2026. Would I expect any of these players to be back next year? No, but do I think it's really, really hard to do a 5-man overhaul for your team? Yes, like if you wanted to build around someone, we'll give some options as we continue to look further. But for Dplus KIA, nice win to get going into a pivotal play-in time where you need as much momentum as possible, but it's DNF. Like, how much do you really want to gain out of a series like this? So let's go ahead and talk about it. Guess we can start with player of the series. I think that's probably a good place to begin the discussion. For me, it's Showmaker in the mid lane. I felt like he was the one that was pushing the team forward the most in their wins. Even if you can criticize his Annie game in game 2 quite extensively, I think he played that game quite poorly, if we're being honest. You know, Bulldog wasn't very good throughout the rest of the series. The Ahri was really the big game-breaking threat in game 3, and I think the Orianna in game 1 also was a big piece of why the team felt so capable. You had aiming being able to get facilitated so easily with all the engage coming out on DK with Nico, with Ornn, with Jarvan, and then Orianna ball on literally any of them ends up becoming a really big problematic scenario for DNF. So I think Showmaker was the most relevant player in this game, in this series, even if it doesn't necessarily show in the KDA, and that's kind of been the case for Showmaker. Again, I talked about this a bit earlier on in the week, and I've talked about this in some previous weeks. Almost every single one of DK's wins this split you can attribute to Showmaker being the best player on the Rift, and obviously that should be the case here in the Rise group. You shouldn't be having a ton of problems if you're Showmaker going up against Bulldog and, you know, Yehu every single series. Like, that's not something where you should be struggling. Vikla, right? Like, players like that you should be beating pretty regularly, but like DK has not been consistent elsewhere. Like, he actually has been a beacon for this team in a couple of key ways. I will continue to go to bat for Showmaker during a time, and I've done this the past few years when everybody seems to have turned on him a bit in terms of maybe what their expectations are. Do I think this guy is a top 4, you know, mid laner in the league? Probably not. Like, he's just not there anymore. But do I think he's firmly number 5 and way better than everybody else? Probably. I think that definitely could be the case. And who knows, man, with Zeka playing the way he is Showmaker definitely worse than where Zeka's at right now? Like, that's definitely a conversation I think you can have. Showmaker has been very valuable, and DK would be a pretty bad team without him, but there are other pieces, liked how Aiming played this series. Again, he just kind of is the follow-up. He reminds me a lot of how we talk about hope for anyone's legend over in the LPL, where it's just like, how much do we want to attribute the great KDAs and like the okay numbers to him? He continues to be a stats warrior. Like, he is the prime example that I always give of stats aren't everything in terms of evaluating players in League of Legends. Like, you can look at a player's stats and see something incredible, and then you can watch them actually play, and there's like nothing that they do to generate that themselves. They're just really good at taking advantage when the rest of the team does that for them. I think Aiming's a good player. Like, I think he's valuable to DK because there are a lot of players that aren't very good at Aiming's specific skill set, which is being somebody that can be kind of left alone and still be very useful in the later part of the game. But I don't think he's a superstar, and I don't think he's really dragging this team to wins. I would say Beryl was much better this week, which you needed to have happen. Again, he has to step up. Lucid had some problems. Pyosik was honestly pretty good for DNF in this series on the Lee Sin, on the Kindred, some of his more recognizable champions, and then Shiwu was also generally fine, mostly on tank duty throughout this series. So for DK, it really just comes down to, can Showmaker carry them across these bad teams to get them into the playoffs? I'm very concerned about this team. I think top 4 is really solidified right now in the LCK. Anything can really happen, and theoretically, this team very much can still make worlds, but it's definitely a long shot. And then for DNF on the other side, if this is the last time that we end up seeing this, you know, roster, which it will be, like, there will be changes this offseason, I can guarantee that. This was an absolute disaster for them in every possible way. Every expectation that you could have had for this group of 5 was underperformed in every conceivable notion. Berserker was generally their best performing player, I would say, throughout this split. There were moments where he was okay in this series, but really, if you're talking about this series in particular, the player to take away is Pyosik. I thought he played great for DNF. The Lee Sin, the Kindred, I think both of those games were genuinely very good, and he just didn't really have any backup when it came to the rest of the series. Definitely can be a bit frustrating, but Pyosik was also the single worst player in the league for a large portion of this year, especially talking about the spring split. So I don't exactly feel terrible for him. Dud of the series for me is going to go to Bulldog in the mid lane. Bulldog needs some time back down in Challengers League. The one thing I do want to reiterate, it's the point I've made on Bulldog, and I will continue to make it for the rest of this team and for the rest of time when it comes to this organization. This org has, without fail, like consistently over the course of basically their entire history, regardless of what they're called, the DN Freecs, the Guangdong Freecs, the Afrika Freecs, whatever, it does not matter. The Freecs organization has consistently brought in good young talent and made them worse. Like, It's just what happens when you go over to the Freecs. Like, this is an organization, and certainly this is a modern coaching staff that has consistently brought in young, interesting players, gotten to work with them, and they've gotten worse on their time with the organization. I think Bulldog is the best example of that. He was a carry-oriented player when he came up at 17 through their system, and he was given a lot of resources and was asked to be this big dynamo, and his mechanics were really strong, and he looked like he could be a player that could really make a difference if he were to grow in the next few years. And all that's happened is that the aggressiveness has been coached out of him. He's become a significantly more passive player, and now his mechanical, expertise has decreased by quite a lot. Like, he's just gotten worse in almost every single aspect of the game in an attempt to try and broaden his horizons and make him more of a facilitative type of mid laner. It's just completely killed any sort of momentum he had as a player coming up to the LCK, and this is something that we see regularly out of this org. It's happening with Dudu as well, a player that came in looking like, white hot and was great his first year here, and then he's just stayed on this org and gotten worse year over year over year. Part of this you can blame on the players, but, once or twice I can blame on, circumstance. Like, when this happened 4, 5, 6 times, every player that comes through this system fails. You have to start wondering just what is happening in terms of the coaching and the organization behind the scenes, because, things are just a nightmare for DNF just in general. Hopefully they can figure things out. Hopefully Berserker is not caught in the DNF prison going into next year, but it's going to be really hard for me to support this organization and trust that whatever they bring in next year is going to work either, because they have shown over and over again as an org that no matter how much talent they bring in, they are going to underperform it. But this is a nice win for DK. Again, really, it just comes down to confidence. You just want to be able to build up as much of that as possible, as much momentum as you can going into play-ins. But honestly, at this point, it's really just, can these players live up to their own expectations? Because really, it shouldn't be a question in terms of talent whether or not they're able to make playoffs. But that's going to bring us to our 5th and final day of action here in Week 15 and our final day of the regular season here in the LCK. And we closed it off, first off, I guess, with the matchup between Nongshim, RedForce, and KT Rolster, where KT absolutely decimate Nongshim. They get their hyper carry ADC super fed in game number 2 and basically just waltz to a victory. I want to kind of shake KT fans and be like, do you still want King and Lehens? Is that still something that you think would make your team better right now? Because quite frankly, looking at this series, it's just very obvious that KT have synergy that Nongshim just don't. Lehens is still kind of off on his I'll play anything but a support phase, where he's playing Poppy and Maokai. I guess they are supports, right? Like, Elise is a support. Shen is a support in the sense that you can play them there, but like, he doesn't want to play Alistar. He doesn't want to play Rel. He doesn't want to play Rakan. He's going to have to play something crazy, or else he's not going to be playing the game, and I'm glad he kind of ended his split on that, because I think it's the most poetic in terms of just the way things have been going. And of course, Perfect was awesome in this series on the top side, but none of that really matters, because the two big diffs in this series were in the jungle and in the AD carry role, where both of them were excellent. For Nongshim, thank God this is over for them. They officially go the entirety of Legend Group winless in terms of a series, in terms of a best of 3. They didn't take a single one in a triple round robin. Truly nightmarish stuff, about as bad as you could possibly get. They've now lost 13 series in a row, and that's the worst place you can be. We'll talk about them a little bit later, but for KT, Dectum is going to get player of the series for me. How can you not after that Kaisa game? I get that Cuz was tremendously good in this series, and I do think that his enabling of Dectum and Peter to play as aggressively as they did should be commended, and it should really be talked about in a positive light for KT Rolster, but Dectum's still the player who had to come in and make it work, and this was LPL Kaisa levels. Like, he learned a lot from FPX last year. I can definitely promise you that, because this was a tremendously good game 2 performance from him. Dectum's just kind of been very good in the back half of this year. Do I think he's a superstar? No, I don't think he has the mechanics to ever turn into a superstar, but I will continue to describe him the way I always have, which is that jack of all trades, master of none type of AD carry that's just kind of going to be good in whatever role you ask him to play in. He's never going to do it better than the best in the world, but he's almost always going to do it better than like your average player, which is a really good skill set to have, and I think Dectum is valuable to this team. But Cuz is the other player that you simply have to talk about here. If you wanted to give Cuz player of the series, I certainly have no major qualms against that. I think this is the best series he's had in quite a while. I think that there were moments where Cuz looked pretty lost in the middle of this split. Almost all of that had to do with the fact that Wei came back in for support, and Wei is just not an LCK player, but Cuz with Peter and with the rest of this team kind of clicking, still has been one of the scarier junglers. I don't think he's quite been able to make his way into that upper echelon. I still would take quite a few over him, but Gideon's been an okay player throughout this year. He's not really been the problem for Nongshim, and Cuz really outplayed him in terms of these aggressive junglers in this series. The Xin Zhao, the Jarvan, especially the Jarvan in game number 1, all of the setup he was capable of doing. Just a great series from him. Perfect was really good. BDD took more of a facilitative role, which is always good to see when you have, your best player on the team be capable of playing Ryze and ante in a series and you're still capable of like dominating that series, it's a good sign. And Peter was obviously fantastic, especially on his signature recon in game 2. KT fans do not need to worry. This is a Worlds team. If you expect more out of them, you're going to get disappointed. If you expect less out of them, then I think you're underselling what KT actually is. They are firmly the 4th best team in the LCK, and for Nongshim, they wish that they could be in that situation right now because it is just not looking good for them. Gideon is the obvious choice for dud of the series here on the Wukong, on the Nocturne. Both of those games were just absolutely horrific from him. The difference between him and Cuz in this series, I think, was just too massive to overlook. I like Gideon. I think his prospects actually look pretty good moving forward, but the situation he found himself in here with Legend Group was just so not conducive to growing as a player and to getting better, something he had done super consistently over the past 3 years. And so I am a bit frustrated because it does really feel like, I will say it. I know people like this format. I hate this format. I think it's been a complete flop. I think every negative that you can throw at it has come true. Legend Group has been the most boring thing you could possibly watch. Oh, did we get more Gen.G T1? I guess technically we got more of that, but do I want to see Hanwha Life and KT kind of feel like bad teams to tamper my expectations going into Worlds? No. And obviously players like Gideon and Calyx, like, they didn't really get a chance to develop over the course of the back end of this year because they were constantly getting their shit kicked in every single series, and I think that is really frustrating for me. So it just kind of is what it is. You don't want to be a young player that gets into Legend Group. It might be the single worst thing you can do for your career unless you just randomly are able to compete, because it just isn't. It's not good. Gideon got worse throughout this split for sure. His confidence seems to be completely broken, and while Calyx is probably the best player on this team, ironically enough, right now, it's not like he's actually winning games or anything like that. Kingin on the top side was a nightmare in the second half of the split. Like, I mean, Lehens has not been good. Jiwoo has not been good. Like, what do I even say about Nongshim? What is this team going to look like going into the play-in stage? I have no freaking clue. This team is going up against whoever wins our final series of the split. Pretty cool to have that kind of, stake on the line at the end of a split like this. But whoever they go up against, like, I'm not saying that they're going to be underdogs, but I'm certainly not feeling good about Nongshim going into any of those series. I would expect that a lot of the negative traits are probably going to stick for this team because they haven't had chances to weed them out. Hopefully they can figure things out and start to get back to something close to what they were at the beginning of the year, but quite frankly, I think this format might have killed them. And for KT on the other side, as bad as they are, they're, in comparison to HLE and Gen.G and T1, like, not to say they're bad, they're still a great team. And again, they're borderline top, 6 or 7 in the world. Like, I think that there is an argument that KT could even be a top 5 team if you really wanted to say 4 of the top 5 teams are in the LCK. I wouldn't even hate you for saying that. I think that there is an argument. So KT fans are going to continue to over freak out about the negativity, but they're probably a Worlds team, and they probably, are going to be a team that ends up making a splash there at least. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the regular season here in the LCK, and this is a big one. It's a genuine play-ins qualification series. The winner will go on to the play-ins as the 4th and final seed. The loser is done for 2025. Must win. It was DRX taking on OK BRION, and OK Bro do get the job done when it matters the most. They end up picking up the 2-1 series win. They're going to be moving on to the play-in stage, and unfortunately, that does mean that the year is over for DRX. The former world champions are going to be one of the first 2 teams in the LCK to be done for 2025. It's a terrible end for a team that genuinely looked like they had some hope at the beginning of the year with Yucal playing so well, but his fall off in spring, the subsequent roster change just not working out. DRX will be bottom 2, but we'll get to them. Let's talk about Bro. First and foremost, huge win for this team. Now, quite frankly, it should never have been this close. If Bro had been even slightly better over the past couple of weeks, they would have run away with the number 8 seed. This is not like a huge upset or anything like that. This was cinema, however, in game number 3, because truly you cannot ask for anything more than a do or die game 3 between Rise group teams DRX and Bro, where it goes 45 minutes and both teams throw at multiple areas. It's incredibly funny how this ended up breaking down. Bro gets this gigantic lead through great macro at the beginning of the game, but then they lose a Baron fight. DRX get this gigantic gold lead off of that, basically by themselves, and look to be poised to win the game instantly, only to throw it themselves, with Sponge making some back-breaking errors on the Wukong to end the game, and for Bro to be able to pick it up. It truly was incredible cinema. I would really recommend you go and watch this game number 3 if you haven't. The stakes are incredibly high. The tension is absolutely there, and of course the gameplay was chaotic, which is kind of what you want out of a crazy game like this, but huge win for Bro, player of the series for me is going to go to Krako in the jungle. Truly seeing the difference between these two junglers is what, like, I think the difference between these two teams was in this series. I think Krako being better and certainly more composed than someone like Sponge in the big moments is what ended up creating that advantage for Bro. Credit to Sponge, his Xin Zhao game in game 2 was excellent, and I also think his early game in game 3 was pretty good. His early game in game 1 was even okay, all things considered, but he did not have the late game macro down. That's where things really fell apart. He made some terrible decisions, and quite frankly, you can't really look at this series without looking at Sponge's mistakes, but Krako took advantage of them, especially on that Trundle in game 3. I think that was his best game of the series. The Jarvan game was still very good in game number 1. Everything just kind of went Bro's way in game number 1, but this is the veteran leadership you brought Krako in for. If this is Hanbok, I don't know if they win this game. Like, genuinely, I really do think that he is the difference maker for Bro getting in to play-ins and Bro not getting into play-ins, so credit to Krako. Glad they picked him up. Glad he had a job in the LCK, and I'm glad he made it worth their while. Rest of the team was still solid. Hype had a really good week, like an under-the-radar, very good week, I would say, in terms of his, individual performances. Was pretty good in these team fights. Again, maybe can afford to be a bit less risky and aggressive in terms of the way he sets things up, but the talent is definitely there. Closer was the better mid laner here. Not that that should be a huge surprise. Yehu is like the master of only slightly losing to his enemy mid laner, no matter who it is. Not like, regardless of the quality and the skill set, he is slightly going to lose to the best mid laners. He is slightly going to lose to the worst mid laners. He's going to be down 10, 15 CS against everybody. It's kind of crazy how that works. Morgan had his best series in a very long time on the top side here. Really necessary for him to get involved in the way that he did, especially on the Mbessa in game number 1, which was massive. Really just everything working out for Bro. Honestly, just happy for them because I do believe that this team has something to prove. And we just talked about it with Nongshim. It's certainly not impossible for that team to have just lost every bit of their confidence, and Bro might have what it takes in order to cause a massive upset. But for DRX on the other side, it's just really sad to see this be the way that their year ends, especially because of just how much hype I had for them, with certain parts of this roster coming out of winter. Not maybe going into the year. They overperformed what I expected in winter because UCal was excellent. Then they came back for spring, and UCal was terrible. One of the worst players in the entire league, and they benched him for Yehu, and then he never got his job back, and DRX just continued to be shit. Like, I still don't understand why. Maybe they just told him to go home, and they were like, we're not playing you again no matter what. Like, the fact that you continued to play Yehu in the mid lane over UCal, I think is mismanagement coming in from a team that is now bottom 2, but everything kind of going wrong for this team. I already talked about it a bit, but Sponge is dud of the series. If he had made better decisions at the end of game 3, perhaps they do end up taking that game, but the what if game I think is not particularly fun for a team like DRX right now. It's really more so looking at this team and its players and wondering what we can do going into next year. They've really tried to push this youth narrative for this roster, either picking up like other youth players that have maybe not worked out on their individual teams, like Ondel. I guess Rich kind of is a part of that, but Rich has been everywhere at this point. Or, promoting their own youth players like Sponge and like Yehu to try and find spots for them, but almost none of those things have worked out. Ondel was a downgrade to Plata, and it's still absolutely absurd that Ondel is the starting support. Yehu is not, the upside of UCal. He's just going to be a below average mid laner at this level, even if it's by a very small margin, and Sponge just makes too many mistakes in order to be a player that you can rely on. It really just feels like all of the swings that DRX have taken as an org have missed. And it's not even counting the ones that they've already gone back on, like Frog in the top lane, getting rich, or signing Juhan only to play him in challengers all year. Like, just crazy stuff like that. Even Lazy Feel, right at the AD carry role, just feels like nothing has ever really worked out for DRX in the way that they've wanted to invest into their youth system. And for as good as their challengers team has been for basically the last 5 years, it's never really resulted in anybody making an impact at the tier 1 level, even for other teams. And so we'll see what DRX ends up doing. This year has got to be considered a pretty massive disappointment for them, but hopefully 2026 is better. For Bro, though, they're not done. They're going to be moving into the play-ins, as we'll talk about at the end of this video. I'm happy for them. Do I think this is really going to mean a lot? No, I think there is a clear cut below, like, FearX. Like, I think, FearX upwards, all could theoretically make playoffs, and I would feel pretty confident about that. Bro, not so much. I feel like this is the one team going into play-ins that I would be surprised if they did end up upsetting people and actually making the top 6, but I guess anything is really possible, and Bro clearly has some sort of magic. I think they'll take a top 8 finish, though, if that is where they end up landing. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCK Week 15 overview and analysis video, and that's going to do it for the LCK regular season here in 2025 as the summer split is done. We are getting into the play-in stage, the summer split playoffs, and then, of course, the qualification for Worlds. Everything is really exciting around this time, but before we jump in to the future, let's talk about the past at least a little bit. First and foremost, my player of the week and my dud of the week to wrap up week number 15. My player of the week, maybe shocking a few people, it's going to go to Raptor, the jungler jungler for BNK FearX. I really do think that he was that important towards this team's success this week. I think FearX have been really good over the course of the past few weeks just in general, and I think this team is kind of peaking at the right time. I know we've said that about Sandbox and about FearX before, as we did last year, but I really do think Raptor's the kind of player that steps up towards the end of the year and really starts to play better when the games matter more. I kind of trust him a lot, and he was great throughout this week. The DNF series, he was obviously fantastic, but a big reason why they had such an easy time against DRX was, that was Raptor's setup. The Silas game in Game 3, the Pantheon game in Game 2, I didn't even put it here, but the 10-kill Wukong game that they lost in Game number 1 where he was excellent. Raptor really just had a fantastic week, and I really think he deserved to be considered the best player in the week in the final week of the regular season. Honorable mentions for me, Showmaker, the mid laner for Dplus KIA. They really solidified their spot here going into play-ins, and he was a big reason for that in this 15th and final week. And then Ruler, the AD carry for Gen.G. Basically, one Gen.G player has to be here every single week, basically no matter what they do, because they consistently win games, and somebody's always playing really well. In this case, it's Ruler who gets the honorable mention, but I think it can go a variety of different ways. My dud of the week, unfortunately, is going to go to Sponge, the jungler for DRX. He really did cost his team when it mattered the most. He was not very good this week at all in either series that they played, either against FearX or, of course, against Bro, where he made the basically season-ending mistake in game number 3. Of course, there's a lot more to it than that, but Sponge, grew a lot from last year, didn't grow enough to quite get his team into top 8. So Sponge is my dud of the week, and Raptor is my player of the week. I'm quickly going to touch upon awards here, because quite frankly, it's really not all that interesting. Again, I'm not doing yearly awards. I think that that's kind of a stupid concept just in general with how much changes from winter to spring to summer. I think it's fair to kind of classify it in a bunch of different ways. My MVP, still gonna go to KIA, although if you wanted to give it to Ruler, I mean, it's KIA or Ruler. I think those are the two that are fighting it out for MVP of Summer Split for me. My first team All-Pro, sorry, any fan that is not a top 2 team fan, Keen, Canyon, Chovy, Ruler, KIA. Sorry if that's frustrating that it's 4 Gen.G players in KIA. They were the 5 best players in the league. I think KIA is the only one outside of Gen.G that really broke through in their own individual positions, but Gen.G just had such a stranglehold of the regular season, it's hard for me to look in a different direction. So those are my awards. I hope that doesn't ruffle too many feathers, but didn't want to spend too much time on it because it's pretty easy to talk about. With that being said, the regular season done and dusted, let's get into the play-ins. Let's look at the bracket and kind of give my predictions for what I think is going to happen in the play-ins. First and foremost, talking about the format, of course, the bottom 1 team from the Legend group, this case, Nongshim RedForce, is going to be in the play-in stage. All of the top 4 teams have already qualified for the playoffs as the top 4 seeds. This is just to determine the final 2 seeds going in to the playoffs. Nongshim, of course, has their backs up against the wall. They're on a 13-series losing streak right now in the regular season. That's not even counting the fact that they underperformed in the playoffs as well. This is a team that has lost all momentum, but it's the top 3 teams from the Rise group that will be joining them. Dplus KIA at 6, BNK FearX at 7, and OK BRION at 8. It is, like I said, double elimination, and so you can still afford to screw up in the first round and qualify through, but you don't want to screw up too many times. You need to win 2 series in order to make the playoffs. Giving my predictions for this round number 1, first and foremost, Nongshim taking on OK Bro. Unfortunately for Bro, I just don't know if they have the talent. Like, as much as I think Nongshim is pretty exploitable right now, which we can talk about if, we preview potentially a winners finals, if you will, of the play-ins here, I do think that Nongshim is better than Bro, and I think they're going to be able to get the job done and move on to the qualification match. Maybe they drop a game or 2. I'd be surprised if Bro made it overly competitive, but Nongshim, despite the fact that they've been terrible, this might be the one team in the play-ins that I actually do think they would beat right now. As for Dplus KIA versus FearX, I think this is way closer than people think it is, and I wouldn't be all that surprised if these are the 2 teams that end up making the playoffs out of the play-ins. I'm not saying I'm predicting that right now. I'm still going to have to go with DK just because I think their roster is so much more talented than BFX's is. But honestly, with the way that FearX is playing right now, if Diablo can step up for just a couple of games and you get 1 good performance out of Raptor, 1 good performance out of Clear on the top side, 1 passable performance out of Vikla in the mid lane, there is a real world where they are just the best team in this play-in stage. I really do believe that that's more possible than people think. I'm not going to predict it, but I think it is certainly something that you have to consider as a possibility. So I'm predicting Nongshim and DK. I think DK will easily be able to move on to the playoffs. I think really the question is who is joining DK of Nongshim and BFX. I think that's really going to be what we end up determining, and we'll see how that ends up going down. I hope we get a series between those 2 teams, but that's going to do it for today's video. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. If you liked it, leave a like. I know I just said it so many times, it felt kind of cool coming out of the mouth, but let me know down in the comments if you enjoyed it. Leave a like if you did. Of course, we're going to be covering all of the LCK playoffs, the play-ins, all of that stuff, the World's qualification, but we also cover all 3 of the other major regions as well, so LTA North, LEC, and LPL. Every single week on the channel, we've been covering the NACL playoffs, Tier 2 over in North America, as well every single week on this channel, so If you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell. I am still casting for LPL English. In fact, I will be on one of the first best of fives of the playoffs coming up this weekend. So if you're excited for that, then tune into that. The links to that are going to be in the description, the YouTube and the Twitch. Follow, subscribe on whatever platform you prefer. And I'd love to see you there in chat. Come and say hello. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all